The offer was simple, $10 million for silence, but she chose chaos instead. That night, the air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation. The kind of anticipation that sticks to your skin, crawls into your spine, and waits for something or someone to unravel everything. The string quartet played softly in the background. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter floated, light and meaningless. Underneath it all, there was something else, a current of discomfort, a feeling that something didn't belong, and that something, or rather, someone, was Elena Torres. She stood at the back of the room, unseen but seeing everything. Her eyes scanned the crowd. The men in tuxedos who made decisions with a nod. The women adorned in diamonds heavier than their consciences. The waiters moving like ghosts with trays of champagne. It was all so carefully choreographed, so perfectly rehearsed. But tonight's performance wouldn't follow the script. Earlier that day, Elena had received the envelope, black, unmarked, heavy with implication. Inside she found two things: a printed note, unsigned but unmistakable in its tone, and a slip of paper that changed everything, a pending wire transfer of $10 million. The note read only, "You know too much. Walk away." No threats, no explanations, just a command. Just money. But silence was never going to be enough for Elena. For 2 years she worked in the heart of power, not in a boardroom or on a throne, but in the shadows of a trillion-dollar tech empire. She was the executive assistant to the CEO, the kind of position that seemed small but was anything but. She booked flights, scheduled meetings, fetched coffee, and in doing so, she became the keeper of secrets. She heard everything. She saw too much. She remembered it all. She remembered the night a junior developer vanished after uncovering a data breach. She remembered the cover-up memo drafted 2 hours later. She remembered the emergency board meeting, not because she attended it, but because she ordered the catering and picked up the shredded notes from the conference room floor. And then, just like that, she was fired. No warning, no explanation. 2 weeks before the gala. That should have been the end, but for Elena it was just the beginning. That night, as she stepped into the ballroom wearing a simple black dress, she carried nothing but a clutch and something far more dangerous: the truth. She had memorized the speech. She had rehearsed the clicks to reveal the files. She had installed the remote trigger in her phone. She had burned the NDA, literally. The ashes were still in her kitchen sink as the host began to speak, some grandiose summary of the company's legacy. Elena moved closer to the stage. No one noticed her. That was her power. She blended in. She was invisible. Until she chose not to be. When she reached the podium, no one stopped her. Not at first. There was a beat of confusion, then a flicker of recognition, then the hush, the kind that only happens when something unnatural interrupts a carefully curated reality. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "My name is Elena Torres," she said, steady and cold. "I was offered $10 million to keep silent." A ripple, a shifting of bodies, a tightening of jaws, and I refused. Behind her, the screens activated. Files appeared, personnel documents, internal memos, bank transfers, one after another. Scandal layered upon scandal. Names, dates, dollar amounts, lives ruined for profit. One screen showed an autopsy report with a redacted name, Elena Reed, the name aloud. The crowd gasped. Some turned away. Others pulled out their phones. And then silence again. Not because she stopped speaking, but because the truth had filled the room so completely, there was no space left for denial. Among the guests was the CEO himself, his expression unreadable, his hand gripping a champagne flute that suddenly felt too fragile. Next to him, two board members exchanged a glance that said everything. Elena saw it. She had always seen it, but now everyone else did too. The heartbeat sound echoed faintly through the speakers. It wasn't part of her presentation. It was a glitch maybe. Or maybe it was real hers, pounding in defiance. She had no plan for what came next. She didn't care. Because the moment she chose to speak, she became more than an assistant, more than a casualty. She became the story. And as the ballroom plunged into chaos, as security hesitated, unsure whether to remove her or protect her, one truth became clear. She had detonated a bomb built from silence. And now there was no going back. Before, she was the woman who shattered a trillion-dollar empire with a whisper. Elena Torres was invisible, not by choice but by design. Born in the small, stifling town of Elkins, West Virginia, Elena was the daughter of a single mother who cleaned motel rooms 6 days a week and taught her daughter the value of listening, because in a town like theirs, speaking out only drew trouble. Her mother used to say, "The loud ones get seen, the smart ones get away." Elena was both, but she learned to hide one behind the other. At school, she was quiet, observant, not the kind to raise her hand, but always the one with the highest grades. She listened more than she spoke. She noticed things when the principal hid his flask in the third drawer, when the substitute teacher forged attendance records, when the star quarterback flinched every time his father came near. She carried all these truths in silence. And then she got out. with a scholarship in hand and a suitcase with broken wheels. She left Elkins for the East Coast Columbia University, political science and linguistics. Dual major, double shifts in campus security to pay rent, nights spent in libraries, mornings in seminars. She didn't party, she didn't date. She calculated Elena's life changed the day she attended a guest lecture by a man named Julian Crest, the newly anointed CEO of Laxotech, a rising star in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and data analytics. He was magnetic, brilliant, dangerous. And Elena for the first time was seen after the lecture. She waited, not to ask a question but to hand him a note. It was short, a suggestion to correct an error he made in his presentation, a minor detail about a machine learning protocol, but it was enough. 3 days later, she was summoned to a private meeting with Crest. 3 weeks later, she was offered a job, not an internship, not a trainee position, executive assistant at 20-3 at Laxotech. To many that job sounded mundane. For Elena, it was everything: access, proximity, power, not her own, but power she could learn from, dissect, understand. And slowly, day by day, she did. She learned how billionaires spoke when they thought no one was listening. She memorized their tells, the way they scratched their noses before lying, the way they used pseudonyms in emails. She became fluent in silence and secrets. At Laxotech's sprawling glass tower, Elena was a ghost in high heels. She organized the CEO's life to perfection, managed his chaos, deflected lawsuits, oversaw accidental data purges. She did it all with the precision of a surgeon and the detachment of a machine. But beneath the calm exterior, something else grew: doubt that turned into suspicion. Suspicion that hardened into resolve. The first time she saw something truly disturbing was during a late-night audit. She often stayed after hours when the building emptied and the facade faded. While compiling encrypted files for a quarterly review, she stumbled upon a flagged folder labeled Deep Freeze. Inside were documents referencing terminated projects, whistleblower settlements, and a line item titled Omega Vault. She bookmarked the file, but the next morning it was gone. Not moved, deleted, scrubbed from the server. And then came the whispers. A researcher found dead in his apartment, ruled a suicide. Elena had spoken to him days before. He was anxious, yes, but not suicidal. He'd discovered irregularities in the AI model, anomalies that suggested the algorithm wasn't just predicting behavior, it was manipulating it. Elena kept her head down, but she started saving everything offline on an encrypted drive, one only she knew existed, hidden behind a false wall in her closet. She collected emails, documents, call logs, a digital trail of whispers and shadows. Every time something felt wrong, she saved it. Then, 2 weeks before the gala, she was called into HR. No eye contact, no explanations. Your position has been made redundant, they said. Redundant, as if someone had discovered her collection. As if she'd become a liability. They escorted her out like a criminal. No time to pack her things, no farewell, just a severance check and a cold smile. She went home. She sat in silence. Then she plugged in the drive. Everything was still there, and then came the envelope delivered by hand. No return address. The note was brief, almost casual in its cruelty. No too much, walk away. Attached was the confirmation: $10 million ready to transfer. All she had to do was disappear. She held the paper in her hand for hours. 10 million. It was more money than she could ever spend. She could change her name, vanish, live in peace, but peace wasn't what she wanted. Justice was. Elena stared at her wall, covered now in printed files, highlighted lines, red strings connecting people, departments, scandals. It looked like madness, but it was clarity. She took out a lighter and burned the NDA. The paper code turned to ash. And in that moment, Elena Torres quiet. Invisible. Elena made a decision. She wasn't going to vanish, she was going to explode. Her next steps were deliberate, strategic. She contacted her old mentor, a retired journalist named Alana Verge, once blacklisted for refusing to bury a corruption story. They met in a diner off the interstate. Alana slid a USB across the table. No words were needed. Alana looked at her. You sure? Alana nodded. I want a stage. That's when the plan began. The gala, the files, the microphone, and the war. Because Elena Torres was no longer the assistant. She was the architect of reckoning and the empire she once served. It was about to burn. They were the architects of the illusion, the power behind the power. And Elena knew each of them by name, by face, by sin. At the center of the empire sat Julian Crest, the CEO of Laxotech to the world. He was a visionary, the man who revolutionized cybersecurity, who spoke on stages in Davos, who appeared on magazine covers with headlines like "The Mind of the Future." But Elena had seen the other side. Julian was a man built from charm and cruelty. His charisma wasn't warmth, it was weaponized. He knew how to own a room, how to make you feel chosen, special, needed. until the moment you stopped being useful. Then he would strip you down, piece by piece, until you disappeared into irrelevance. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. A glance from Julian was enough to fire someone, destroy a career, silence a whistle. And behind that calm face, the perfect suits, the rehearsed humility, was a man who believed he was untouchable, because for a long time he was. But Julian wasn't alone. The board was a fortress, 12 men and women with portfolios vast enough to move markets. They operated in shadows behind shell companies and offshore accounts. Alina had watched them arrive at meetings in limousines, with briefcases filled not with papers, but with favors owed and secrets traded to. In particular, stood out Archer Kincaid, former military intelligence, now the lead strategic advisor at Laxotech, a man whose presence was always announced by silence. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was to end a discussion, not join it. Alina had once caught a glimpse of his personnel file redacted from top to bottom. What wasn't redacted was his ownership of a consulting firm tied to several defense contracts and 2 non-existent black sites in Eastern Europe. And then there was Margot Dupont. Elegant, cold, deadly. She smiled like a debutante and thought like a predator. Her family's fortune came from pharmaceuticals, but her power came from data. Alina had once overheard a conversation, Margot talking about a pilot program that tracked biometric responses through mobile apps. She called it harmless feedback optimization, but the internal documents called it something else: behavioral manipulation. Alina remembered the chill that ran down her spine that day. These weren't just executives, they were tech in a silent war for control, not just of a company but of reality itself. Behind closed doors, they buried scandals before they reached the surface. Sexual harassment allegations smothered by financial misappropriations restructured through internal audits, and when the damage couldn't be contained, people disappeared. One junior engineer was transferred to an overseas project after leaking preliminary designs to the press. He was never heard from again. The leak never made the news. Alina saw the transfer request. It was dated the same day the engineer booked a vacation. That's when she began to understand. This wasn't a company. It was a regime. And regimes don't crumble from the outside. They implode from within. The higher you climbed at Laxotech, the less human it became. The executive floors were like altars of silence, white walls, glass offices, air that smelled like antiseptic wealth. No laughter, no warmth, just ambition in its rawest form. Alina existed on the edge of that world, close enough to feel the heat, never close enough to be burned. Until they decided she knew too much. It started with glances, then came the access restrictions. Emails she once monitored now locked, calendars hidden, conversations ending the moment she entered a room. Didn't say it, but they knew. And so did she. The moment she was escorted out of the building, Alina understood something deep and terrifying. She had become a liability to people who didn't tolerate loose ends. That's when the rules changed. She stopped being the observer, she became the threat, and that's what terrified them, because Alina didn't just know names and dates, she understood the patterns. She could predict moves, uncover intent, connect dots hidden in layers of deception. She had watched these people for years, studied their psychology, their fears, their habits. She knew how Julian clenched his jaw when cornered, how Archer scanned a room 3 times before sitting down, how Margot's left eye twitched when she lied. And more than anything, she knew their biggest fear: colon exposure, not just to the public but to each other, because in their world, alliances were built on shared interests, not trust. The only thing more dangerous than a whistleblower was a whistleblower who could divide them. Alina became that danger, not with guns or threats, but with knowledge, and as she prepared to confront them at the gala, she wasn't just arming herself with evidence, she was preparing a surgical strike: expose Julian's offshore laundering through the company's philanthropic arm, reveal Archer's connection to unsanctioned military operations used to beta test Laxotech surveillance software, disclose Margot's biometric project, the one that harvested real-time data from unwitting users and sold it to private defense firms. Each revelation would shatter a piece of the illusion. And once one crack appeared, the whole empire would splinter. That was Alina's plan, not revenge. Revelation. And as the gala approached, she watched them from afar, smiling, toasting, pretending. The powerful often forget one simple truth: the higher the tower, the more devastating the fall. And Alina Torres, she was no longer afraid of heights. It came at night. Like most things meant to unsettle. A single knock, not urgent, not timid, just precise. 3 short raps against the door of Alina's modest apartment, followed by silence so absolute it made her pause mid-step. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days, not since she was fired. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. No one. The hallway was empty, still, the type of stillness that whispered something had already shifted at her feet. A black envelope, sleek, Expensive, no label, no seal. Her heart skipped. She picked it up. The paper oddly cold against her fingers. Heavy, weighted, not with objects, but implications. She closed the door, locked it, and sat down at her kitchen table, staring at the envelope like it might speak first. Then she opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet of ivory paper, one side blank, the other printed in sharp mechanical font. "You know too much, walk away." Below the line, a string of numbers, a bank routing code, international, leading to a Swiss account, and beneath that, confirmation of a wire transfer, pending activation. $10 million, no signature, no legal jargon, no instructions, but Alina understood it perfectly. This was the NDA, not signed in ink, signed in silence. All she had to do was say nothing, do nothing, let the storm pass, fade into obscurity. With wealth most people wouldn't earn in a lifetime, but wealth was never her goal. Justice was still. The weight of the offer crushed her chest. She wasn't immune to the temptation. $10 million. She could change her name, buy a new life, disappear. No more sleepless nights, no more looking over her shoulder, no more fear. She closed her eyes and imagined it, a quiet villa in Tuscany, or maybe a cabin by a lake, hidden, unreachable. Days filled with books, music, silence, the good kind, peace bought by betrayal. She stood, pacing the room, envelope in hand. This was a test, or a trap, maybe both. She looked around her apartment, sparse, clean, impersonal. She hadn't allowed herself to settle in since leaving last. Part of her always expected a knock at the door, just not like this. Her gaze drifted to the far wall where photos and printouts were pinned like a crime board. The faces of the board, the dead engineer, the red strings connecting events that shouldn't be connected, the time-stamped emails, the encrypted files. $10 million to walk away from all of it. And yet, something inside her resisted. This wasn't about money. It was about what they thought of her. They thought she'd sell her silence, like everyone else, like those before her, buried by payoffs, erased by settlements, folded into shadows. She was just another piece to be discarded quietly. That assumption ignited something. Rage. Not loud, not explosive, cold, controlled. She sat back down, opened her laptop, plugged in the drive. She pulled up the Omega Vault directory, the one they thought she hadn't found. Hidden behind decoy folders, disguised as harmless documentation, but she had seen past the camouflage. You always did. She opened the files, again, line by line, cross-referenced timelines, matched account numbers, flagged inconsistencies. It was all there, enough to take down the company, the board, maybe even the shareholders. The envelope still sat beside her. She picked it up, again, and threw it into the sink. She struck a match, watched the flame crawl up the edge. The paper, curled, turned black, crumbled into ash. The envelope, the note, the offer gone. That was her answer, but answers demanded action. She opened a secure browser and ordered a discreet microphone disguised as a brooch, high-fidelity, real-time backup to cloud. Next, she began compiling a dossier, not for the media, not yet, for someone else, someone she could trust. If anything happened to her, it had to survive. She typed the subject line, "If I disappear, then..." Saved it, encrypted it, set the trigger. Next, she reached out to a mentor, Alana Verge, a journalist once blacklisted by every major publication for refusing to kill a story on corporate malpractice. She now lived off-grid, writing exposes under pseudonyms and using burner phones. Elena hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but some bridges never burn. Alana answered after the second ring. "Elena, they know," she said, "and they offered $10 million for my silence." Silence on the line. "Then, where are you?" Elena gave her the address. They met in a dimly lit diner off a forgotten highway. No cameras, no chatter, just the clink of cutlery and the low hum of distrust. Elena handed her the drive. Alana didn't ask questions. She just said, "You sure?" Elena nodded. "I don't want money," she said. "I want them exposed." Back in her apartment, she rehearsed the speech, not in front of a mirror. That wasn't her style. She walked the room, speaking softly, building cadence, channeling years of silence into words sharp enough to cut. She printed copies of the documents. She labeled each one. She checked the mic. Then she did something strange. She sat down and stared at a photo in her fridge. It was of her and Mark. He was a software developer, a friend, maybe more, once before he died. Officially a heart attack, unofficially a silent scream Alina had never stopped hearing. Mark had warned her, "There's something in the vault," he whispered once, days before his death. Something they buried so deep even they're afraid of it. That was the night he started watching his back, and now, so did she. But unlike Mark, Alina had no intention of dying quietly. The envelope had offered peace. She chose war. There are decisions that define the course of a life. Some are made in moments of fire, others in silence. Elena's decision came in both. The apartment was still, it always was. These days, no television, no music, just the low hum of her refrigerator, and the occasional groan of pipes behind the walls. She sat on her floor, legs crossed, papers scattered around her like ashes from a fire, and in many ways, that's exactly what they were, remnants of her old life. Burned at the edges by betrayal, she had just destroyed the envelope, the one with the $10 million offer. Now, in its place, lay clarity. And clarity, Elena had learned, was terrifying. It was no longer about whether she would act, it was about how she picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She scrolled to a contact she hadn't used in 3 years. Gregory Lane, her mentor's mentor, a man who once navigated the perilous corridors of military intelligence and now taught strategy at a tiny university no one had heard of. Elena had interned under him during a summer in DC. He once told her, "The most dangerous woman is the one who knows she's underestimated." She called, he answered. "Elena," he said. No greeting, no confusion. "I heard, of course, you did," she replied. There was a pause. Then quietly, "What do you need?" "Advice," she said, "and confirmation." "Then come, but don't bring your phone." She understood. 2 hours later, she was in a cabin in the woods, heat from a fireplace wrapping around her like an old coat. Gregory poured tea, jasmine, her mother's favorite, a subtle gesture meant to ground her. He listened as she spoke. About the documents, the envelope, the fire. When she finished, he didn't blink. "You've already decided," he said. You're just afraid of admitting it." "I'm not afraid," she said, though her voice wavered. "No." He leaned forward. "Then why haven't you told me your plan yet?" She stared at the fire. Then, finally, she did the gala. The hidden mic, the reveal, the screens, the files, the fallout. Gregory said nothing. "Then it won't just be your career or your safety. You're stepping into a war. And wars, Elena, do not forgive half measures." "I know," she said. "You'll be hunted. I'm already being watched. You'll lose people. I already have." He looked at her, then truly looked. Not like a teacher, not like an elder, but like someone bearing witness to a shift. "Elena," he said, "you're not just burning a bridge. I'm burning the entire city," she replied. That night, she returned to the apartment and prepared. First, she backed up the files again. 5 copies, hidden in 5 locations. One was mailed to a law firm she had no affiliation with, another to a journalist in Sweden, the others she didn't even trust herself to remember. Then came the disguise. She wouldn't show up at the gala as Elena Torres, the exps. She'd show up as a guest, fabricated credentials, a name borrowed from an old Laxotech donor list. She had the badge printed, the RSVP hacked. Security wouldn't look twice, but she needed more. Control. She ordered a hidden microphone, disguised as a brooch, transmitting audio to a secure server in real time. If they tried to stop her, silence her, drag her out mid-sentence, the world would still hear every word. Then came the speech. She didn't write it. She lived it, each word etched in memory, carved by nights of watching corruption wear expensive suits. She rehearsed not for delivery, but for control. She couldn't afford emotion. Not now. Still, it came. One night she stood in the mirror and said the name aloud. Mark. Her voice cracked. He was the reason, the one person who had seen her, truly seen her, not as an assistant or a tool, but as a mind, a heart, a storm waiting for the right sky. And they had taken him, erased him with a story so clean it squeaked. Heart attack, healthy, 28, no history. He died 3 days after telling Lena he'd found something they didn't want public. She begged him to wait, to be cautious. He said he couldn't, said some things were worth the risk. Now, it was her turn. She lit a candle, not for ritual, for focus. She looked at the wall, now covered in maps, notes, photos, timelines. She took one last look at herself in the mirror. Gone was the assistant. Before her stood something else, someone else, not a martyr, a reckoner. Then she whispered the words she would soon say in front of the world. "I was offered $10 million to keep quiet." Pause. "But I won't be silent." Silent. The night of the gala arrived like a storm no one saw coming. It was the 25th anniversary of Laxotech, a celebration designed to dazzle, distract, and defend. Every detail had been curated with the precision of a coronation. Black tie elegance, Michelin star catering, floral arrangements sourced from 5 continents, and a guest list that read like a Forbes fantasy. But tonight, someone not on the list would rewrite the entire script. Elena stood outside the venue, invisible in plain sight. Her dress was midnight blue, simple, unassuming, chosen specifically to blend into the crowd of women whose names were investments, not identities. Her hair was swept back in a sleek chignon. Her badge, forged and flawless, hung from a silver lanyard. Security scanned her. The badge beeped. They waved her through. Inside, the world was made of glass and gold. The ballroom stretched like a cathedral of wealth, high ceilings, chandeliers that shimmered like galaxies, walls lined with portraits of executives past and present. Waiters floated with trays of champagne, voices murmured like a lullaby, and laughter curled around the corners of whispered deals. Alina moved with purpose, heart a steady drumbeat in her chest. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but reality added weight. She could smell the cologne of board members who ordered investigations buried. She recognized faces of analysts who once handed her reports with trembling hands. Every detail screamed opulence. Every second was a countdown. Her target was the stage, a raised platform framed by velvet curtains and two massive screens, the centerpiece for speeches that would glorify Laxotech's legacy of innovation. Behind it, a secured AV control room. That was her first stop. She slipped away from the crowd, down a side hall where the staff moved briskly and silently. She found the door marked Technical ACCESS, authorized only. She knocked once. The tech inside opened. Confused, mid-sandwich. Alina smiled. Julian wants to test the screens for a last-minute update. He sent me. She held out a flash drive, her badge visible. The tech barely looked, just nodded. Slots over there, be quick. Inside, she slid the drive into the system. The files were programmed to activate with her remote signal. Failsafes were in place. Cloud backups, a timed cascade. Once started, it couldn't be stopped, not without tearing down the power entirely. She left the room, heart steadier now. Back in the ballroom, she melted into the crowd again. The speeches had begun. The coup, all practiced humility and corporate theater, was extolling Laxotech's unshakable commitment to ethics and advancement. Alina almost laughed. She spotted Julian near the front, poised, radiant, as if he were the empire personified. He didn't see her, not yet. She moved closer to the stage. Every step calculated, every second counted. Security hovered near the front, but they were there to deter external threats. No one suspected the danger would come from within. Alina waited as the applause rose, and then the moment arrived. The coup turned to introduce Julian. Alina stepped forward. For a brief second, lights caught her. Faces turned, confusion flickered. A beat of silence cracked the air as Julian looked up and saw her. Recognition flared, followed by panic. But it was too late. Alina was on the stage. A hand reached for her arm. A security guard moving fast. She spoke loud, clear. I was offered $10 million to keep silent. The room froze. I refused. A second of stunned silence. Then, chaos. But before anyone could reach her, she pressed the trigger on the brooch. The screens lit up. File names scrolled. PDFs opened in sequence. Images, spreadsheets, confidential memos. A whistleblower report marked urgent, ignored. Financial records, unredacted emails. I worked for this company for 2 years, she said, her voice unwavering. And in that time, I saw things. I documented them. I asked questions. And I was told to be quiet tonight. I won't be. A gasp rippled through the room. Phones were raised, cameras recorded. Security froze, unsure whether to act or observe. Alina continued. The man you're about to celebrate, Julian Crest. He laundered company funds through charitable fronts to influence public contracts. Archer Kincaid authorized experimental surveillance software tested without consent in developing countries. Margot DuPont's app collected biometric data and sold it to third parties under a false privacy policy. Faces in the crowd turned white. Some guests tried to leave, others watched, spellbound. On screen, a document appeared. Omega Vault, internal memo, containment strategies. And then the screen flickered. Someone in the control room was trying to override it, but it was too late. The files had already been mirrored, uploaded, streamed live to 3 independent news servers. Julian moved toward the stage. Alina met his eyes. You made one mistake, she said. You thought I'd be afraid. The room exploded with noise. Alina didn't flinch. She stepped back from the podium, eyes scanning the crowd, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt something strange. Freedom. The room was no longer a ballroom. It had transformed in a matter of seconds into a courtroom, a theater, a battlefield. Chandeliers swayed overhead, casting fractured light onto faces frozen in disbelief. The music had stopped. The speeches were forgotten. Even the security team stood paralyzed, caught between protocol and spectacle. At the center of it all, Alina stood alone, but she wasn't afraid. She looked straight ahead, her voice steady, each syllable slicing through the thick air. Called it innovation, she said. But it was invasion. The screens behind her now displayed biometric data streams, real-time footage from thousands of unsuspecting users, recorded without consent. Pulse rates, facial expressions, emotional responses. Every swipe on an app tracked, every breath analyzed. The crowd murmured, gasps turned to outrage. On screen, a signature flashed, Margot DuPont's. Alina didn't stop. This program, codenamed Project Echelon, was designed to manipulate user behavior through adaptive stimuli. In simple terms, they weren't studying you, they were changing you. Margot rose from her seat, face pale. This is slander, she shouted, her voice trembling under the weight of cameras now aimed directly at her. Alina turned. "No," she said. "This is evidence." The next document appeared, an internal audit detailing illegal offshore accounts, wire transfers, hush payments. A chart followed. Victims of Laxotech's experimental algorithms, people flagged as data liabilities. Some lost jobs. Others were institutionalized. A few had vanished. Julian Crest personally approved a targeting model. Alina continued. Under his direction, the system flagged dissenters, employees, researchers, civilians. Mark Miles was one of them. The name cut through the noise like a blade. Julian's mask cracked. The crowd erupted. Journalists in the back pushed forward. Phones were raised higher. Someone screamed. A guest fainted. Flashbulbs burst like lightning. Alina advanced to have full server logs, video archives, and recovery scripts stored in real time to independent sources. If anything happens to me, it won't matter. The files will still go public. Julian took a step toward the stage, flanked by two advisors who whispered frantically into earpieces. "Alina," he said, voice calm but acidic, "you don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," she replied. "I'm telling the truth, and the truth hurt." The screens changed again, showing surveillance footage of Julian's private meeting with Archer Kincaid in Berlin. Alina had times it cross-referenced travel records. They were discussing the suppression of a whistleblower in Argentina. The footage ended. The silence that followed was a scream of its own. Then a voice from the crowd. "Is this real?" Another, "She has files. Look at the timestamps." A third, "I knew someone who worked there. He vanished." Alina felt the shift, not just in the room but in the world outside it. This wasn't just exposure, it was transformation. People were no longer watching a woman go rogue. They were watching a machine break from within. Security approached again. This time, faster, but Alina was ready. "This event is being live-streamed," she announced. "Try to stop me, and it becomes obstruction, assault, interference with federal investigations. I have legal advisories standing by." They paused. That was enough. On the screen, her final file opened. It was titled Omega Vault Declassified. She didn't speak as it loaded. The documents spoke for themselves. Contracts signed under duress, psychological reports of test subjects, video footage from inside black sites used to test predictive behavior software, children observed without parental consent, experimentation cloaked as beta testing. The crowd's outrage peaked. A woman near the front wept. A man threw a champagne glass to the floor. Julian Crest was no longer the emperor. He was the executioner, caught in the glare of a truth he could no longer dodge. Alina stepped back. "Every empire ends," she said, "not with fire, with facts." Security didn't move. Julian did. He turned and left. No words, no defense, just silence. The board followed. Faces ashen, reputations crumbling in real time. The crowd surged forward, but Alina didn't wait for applause or commentary. She stepped down from the stage, walked calmly through the chaos, past the stairs, past the whispers, through the doors. Outside, the night air was sharp, cold, freeing. Sirens wailed in the distance, not for her, for them, for them. By morning, the world had changed. The gala had become a crater, not in stone, but in silence. What had begun as a celebration of corporate dominance had transformed into a reckoning. The fallout was instant, relentless, merciless. News outlets that once bowed to Laxotech now bled headlines in bold font. "Whistleblower destroys tech giant from inside." "Project Echelon exposed." "Data deceit and domination." Alina Torres, the voice that shattered billions, stock markets, responded like panicked animals. Laxotech's valuation plummeted by over 42% in hours. Analysts scrambled to explain what had just happened, but no one could outpace the avalanche. Shareholders threatened lawsuits. Regulatory agencies opened emergency investigations. Politicians, some of whom were named in Alina's files, began issuing vague statements of concern. But Alina, she was gone. No press conference, no interviews, no social media, just silence. The same silence she once weaponized now turned into legend. Her last public trace was surveillance footage of her stepping onto a subway platform at 1:14 a.m. Moments after exiting the gala, she boarded the train alone. No destination recorded. From that moment forward, she vanished. The world filled in the blanks. Some said she fled to Iceland, a country with strict whistleblower protections. Others insisted she was taken into protective custody by a secret international task force. Conspiracy forums declared her dead. Martyr, spy, hero, ghost. But the files remained accessible, undeniable. Universities began dissecting them. Law schools built case studies around them. Civil rights groups launched global campaigns against biometric exploitation. Countries banned Laxotech apps overnight. Governments demanded answers. The board fractured. Archer Kincaid resigned 3 days later, issuing a 3-line statement. "The integrity of our work must never be compromised. I accept full accountability." Hours after that, His private jet was denied entry to European airspace. Margot Dupont was summoned to a closed hearing in The Hague for violations of the Global Data Ethics Accord. She didn't appear. Her properties were raided. One of her assistants turned whistleblower, releasing recordings that confirmed Elena's evidence, and Julian Crest, once the golden boy of Silicon Valley, was placed under federal investigation. His assets were frozen. His name erased from the front page of Laxotech's website. That morning, a single photo leaked to Julian leaving his penthouse, in a hoodie, unshaven, eyes hollow. The caption read only, "The Fall of a Titan." And still, Elena said nothing. But her voice echoed everywhere. The video of her speech, clipped, subtitled, translated, reached over 80 million views in less than a week. Comment sections filled with praise, rage, reflection. She did what we all dream of doing. They made her a ghost. She made herself a legend. This isn't just about one company. It's about all of them. A movement was born, quiet at first, but growing. Speak Like Elena people shared stories, shared secrets, shared truths they were once too afraid to voice. The digital world, once muted by fear, now surged with defiance. But Elena's absence only fed the fire. Reporters camped outside her last known address. Drones scoured neighborhoods. Hackers tried and failed to locate the servers that hosted her backups. She had planned everything too well, covered every trail, anticipated every reaction. In her disappearance, she became more powerful than any presence could allow. She was no longer just a person. She was a warning, and yet not everyone celebrated. Behind closed doors, a storm gathered. The executives who weren't named publicly began fortifying their defenses. Dark money flowed, like rivers underground. Crisis PR firms were hired. Counterintelligence teams were deployed. Whispers of retaliation surfaced. Elena had exposed them, but not all of them. In the shadows, there were others who had more to lose, others who had survived worse. They began hunting, not for revenge, for containment, because buried in the data Elena released were breadcrumbs, fragments, clues. One file, in particular, caught the attention of someone with the authority to erase entire identities. A file marked Omega Vault, partial DECRYPT. It was corrupted, incomplete, but beneath the code was a phrase that hadn't been spoken publicly in over a decade. Project Harrow. No one outside the black programs knew what it meant, except one. In a surveillance room in Zurich, a man watched Elena's speech for the 22nd time. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't listed in any company registry. He didn't exist on paper, but his face, shadowed by monitors, twisted with recognition. "She moved too soon," he muttered. The lights dimmed and a red notification blinked onto his screen. Omega Vault unlocked. They thought she had said everything, but she hadn't. What Elena exposed at the gala, the biometric surveillance, the offshore laundering, the manipulated behavior algorithms, was devastating. It brought down a company, destroyed reputations, rewrote the tech industry's rulebook, but it was only the surface. Because the files she shared were carefully chosen, curated, measured, she knew too much to release it all at once. What lay beneath was darker. It was called Project Harrow, and even Elena had hesitated before naming it. The file was buried within the Omega Vault, mislabeled, deeply encrypted. Not even Laxotech's own forensic team could fully restore it after Elena's release. Only fragments were visible. But those fragments terrified those who recognized them. One fragment contained a list of dates and GPS coordinates. None of them matched Laxotech facilities. Another revealed a list of names unassociated with any public database, with footnotes marked "asset nullified, pending extraction." But it was the phrase repeated throughout that chilled the few who saw it. Behavioral Restructure Protocol, Stage 5 Activation. What did it mean? Some speculated it was a code for advanced AI experimentation. Others believed it was connected to psychotropic influence, the kind of technology outlawed under international law. A few insiders, former Black Ops analysts, whispered something else entirely. Project Harrow was not just surveillance. It was conversion, an effort to transform dissidents, political enemies, even entire populations, from the inside out. Not with weapons, not with prisons, but with algorithms, silent, surgical, and irreversible. And Elena had found it, or rather, Mark had. That's why he died. He hadn't just found evidence of unethical behavior, he had uncovered the blueprint of a silent war fought through screens and code, without a single shot fired. A war of minds. When Elena reviewed the Omega Vault, she realized something horrifying. The files were incomplete. Someone inside Laxotech had already begun scrubbing evidence months before her discovery, which meant someone else knew. Someone higher, someone untouchable. And so, at the gala, she released enough to collapse the empire, but not enough to expose the war behind it. She knew it would be too much, too early, too dangerous, so she waited. but others DID in single quotes. 2 After her disappearance, cybersecurity firms across the globe reported increased activity, unauthorized access attempts, code injections into major data networks, cloned servers appearing, then disappearing in milliseconds. Someone was looking for the rest of the vault, and someone else was trying to stop them. In Geneva, an anonymous whistleblower leaked a memo allegedly from Laxotech's defunct security division. The memo warned of escalating activation protocols and uncontained influence clusters in beta markets. It named one in particular, São Paulo. Another, Jakarta, and finally, Detroit. Each city had seen sudden shifts in civil behavior, protests erupting without warning, collective hysteria triggered by unknown sources, rapid polarization driven by targeted misinformation campaigns. All within months of Project Harrow's test window. Governments scrambled to deny involvement. Intelligence agencies issued vague denials. Former employees vanished. But amidst the chaos, one question echoed louder than all the rest. Where is Elena Torres? Some believed she was in hiding, preparing to release the second half of the Omega Vault. Others feared she had been captured or worse, silenced. But the truth was even more unsettling. Elena had left a message, not in voice, not in image, on code. A line buried within the metadata of one of her released documents. It read, "The final truth requires choice, not revelation." Cryptographers, you've spent weeks dissecting the phrase. Some interpreted it as a warning that exposing the full Omega Vault could cause more harm than good. Others believed it was an invitation to choose to look deeper, to see what she had seen and decide if the world was ready. But there was one man who didn't hesitate. The figure in Zurich. His face had never been published. His name erased from every record. But he had once served with Archer Kincaid, and unlike the board members who ran from the scandal, he leaned in. He wanted the rest of the vault because Project Harrow had once been his. He had built the framework, then sold it, then vanished until Elena spoke. Now he was watching again, not with anger, but with fascination. She had moved too soon, yes, but she had also opened the door he thought had been sealed forever. He whispered to the screen, "She has the key, she just doesn't know it yet." A screen blinked beside him, a folder opened. Inside, a photo of Elena on the train, her last known location. Then, a second photo, recent taken at a border crossing in Eastern Europe. The man smiled. "She's not hiding," he murmured. "She's hunting. She's hunting." The world had changed, but Elena Torres had not finished. A month had passed since the gala. The fallout still smoldered, investigations deepened, resignations continued, and the tech world was gripped by paranoia. No company wanted to be the next. Laxotech CEOs issued public apologies for crimes they hadn't committed, simply to distance themselves, and still, Elena remained a ghost. Until now, a security camera in a rural station in Slovakia caught her image. A woman in a dark coat, hood up, no luggage, no entourage. She boarded a train heading east, a direction few expected. The image leaked online, but it was quickly suppressed. Too late. The internet caught fire again. She's alive, she's not finished, but no one knew where she was going except her, because Elena had followed the breadcrumbs hidden within her own files, layers she hadn't dared release until she was sure what they meant. Patterns, coordinates, data clusters that pointed not to corruption, but to origin. To the man behind Project Harrow. To the lie beneath the truth. She rode the train for hours, crossing snow-laced borders, through towns that no longer existed on maps. The countryside blurred into steel and frost. Her eyes never closed. Her hand stayed on the encrypted drive that contained what was left of the Omega Vault, the final truth. And she wasn't alone. Somewhere across the world, the man in Zurich tracked her, not to stop her but to witness, because this story, the story was never about money. It was never about revenge. It was about revelation. The train screeched to a halt at a forgotten station. Elena stepped off into the cold, breath curling in the air like smoke from a long-dead fire. A dirt road awaited her. No one to greet her, no signs, just silence. But she knew where she was going. Ahead, buried beneath snow and secrecy, stood a structure, concrete, rusted gates, abandoned on the surface. But beneath it, far below the earth, was something alive, something that had never been shut down. The Omega Vault, not the files, the place where it had all begun, and possibly where it would all end. As she approached, the wind howled around her, as if warning, as if welcoming. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Inside that bunker were truths so heavy, so devastating that even Elena had once questioned whether they should be exposed. She could disappear now, use the money she'd hidden, vanish into another name, another life. But the world had already heard her voice now. They needed her choice, because in the vault was not just evidence, it was a blueprint for manipulation, for domination, for war. And the final key to unlocking it was not a password, it was a name. Written only once, a whisper from the past. The man who built the lie. Elena stepped through the iron door. Darkness swallowed her, and then light. A blinking terminal, a voice not human. "Welcome back, Elena Torres, the screen displayed a phrase, "Shall we begin again?" Cut to black. Text on screen. Part 2. The Man Who Built the Lie, coming soon. Narrator. Subscribe, share, follow the curve, because the truth is still unraveling. And now, you know what they tried to bury. You've seen the facade crumble. You've heard Elena Torres speak when she was meant to stay silent. But what if everything we've uncovered so far was only the prologue? What if the real story hasn't even begun? Because behind every corporation, behind every scandal, behind every clean-cut lie, there's a mind that built it. A man who never appears in documents, a shadow that doesn't leave a trace. The man who built the lie. He's out there watching, waiting, and Elena, she's going after him. So now it's your turn. If you were in Elena's place, would you have burned the NDA? Would you walk away from $10 million? Or would you do what she did and walk into the storm? Tell us in the comments. I stand with Elena. Say it. Let them know the silence ends here. And if you believe the truth should be louder than power, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because this story isn't over, it's just beginning. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and follow the curve. Because the next chapter, it changes everything.